This morning, we're going to start off with our scripture reading before we move into our, what would normally be called our first reading. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "I will do this. I will put down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. All the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God." And at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day. Rhoda Toperzer has been a member of our church for over a decade, we figured out, even though we weren't pinpointing the date exactly. We're so glad that Rhoda is sharing today.
Okay? Working on the sound? Got it. Okay, so what I want to show you and share with you now is a video of an artist, and she it's called "The Artist is Present." And I think I'm just going to let that be enough for you to experience this reading that is visual with sight. I will tell you that it's been a few decades since I've done a sermon, and this is the first time that I'm doing it without a written script. So if this doesn't go well because I get on tangents, I promise you the next time I will have a written one. And I'm a very process person, and I want to say, Beth, thank you for your selection for the responsive reading today, because I read Amanda Gorman's poem as just part of my search, and so thank you. This text of Luke, it was a struggle to work with. In a way, it was like really obvious, the message of don't collect a lot, be generous, right? So like, okay, so I can go sit down now. You know, that's it, right? But I did some real scholarly study about this text, and this whole section of Luke is about the teachings of generosity. It's like here and there again. It's all generosity. And this particular section is kind of pointed because it's lots of fancy words, but basically the parable is you've collected all these things, and the guy's like, "Oh my goodness, I have so many things, I'm going to build more barns." And then the message is, well, you're going to die tonight, so there, you don't get the benefit. And then even calling this guy a fool. Like, that's pretty harsh in scripture, language, and framework. So I don't like to be harsh, so then I had to struggle with this. So I started to look into what is vision, what is seeing. And again, this will be I want to make this clear that people, like Priscilla said, people see even if they don't have vision or our vision is challenged. And so given that, part of this is going to be literal seeing, and part of it is going to be seeing as metaphor. The usual human eye sees with one kind of rod, and that's for discerning light and dark. And there are three kinds of cones. And the cones, three kinds of cones. So the cones are red, blue, and green, and that helps us see color through that. So people have different amounts of rods, and so people who have two, normally it's 3, people who have 2 rods can see about 10,000 colors. People who have 3 rods see about 1 million colors. Most of us see about 1 million colors. Guess what? There is a rare condition called tetrachromy, and that happens when people have 4 rods, and they can see hundreds of millions of colors. I have a friend who has that and is an artist. So, given that, there's another thing about sight, physical sight, and also interior sight, and that is what we apprehend. So like when we were having the exercise of looking around, probably each of us saw it differently, even if we were looking at the same thing. So apprehension is what we take in, what we perceive. And it's just like the concrete data of it. So what we apprehend is filtered through comprehension, our interpretation, what we're picking up from that. And so there are lots of things that influence how we understand what we see. And the understanding of what we see is our perspective. Interesting, coming from a family of 5 kids, maybe you've had other situations growing up where you've had different experiences, even though you were all in the same place at the same time. So, reflecting on what to explore today through the lens of seeing, pun intended, and the first reading related to seeing, I went to work on this text in Luke. So, I thought a lot about this apprehension of what we take in and the comprehension, and thought a lot about how easy it is for me to just, again, simply say, well, let's be good and focus on these other values, and then have different frustrations or feelings about people who have so much, the inequity, which is very evident, the injustices that are very evident. But that was too simple. So I I found myself thinking about, what did this rich person apprehend and comprehend prior in their life? Did they grow up with a sense of scarcity, and so they're like, I don't want that, I'm going to make sure I have a lot, as a reaction to the pain of growing up? Or maybe their family was like all about, hey, get as much as you can, and he was being a good person by doing what he had learned. Just wondering. Well, that took me to the idea of harm or hurt, and all of us having injuries or harms. And that is something we have in common, is having injuries, of having hurt. So then I reflected and thought about this teaching being about how do we get to healing. And so I think that there are hurts that harm more and hurts that lead to healing. And that's what this is about today. And so I'm very much about the sense of interconnection, like with our natural world, interconnection of systems that we live in, the United States system, the economic system, the political values, the way our culture is unfolding, relating with food. Like everything for me is about interrelationship. So that might be different than you, but I thought I'd give you my bias, is about everything's about interrelating. And so given that, I thought about how the parable of the rich person, give me a second, my brain just went blank. About how the rich person might have been showing anxiety when he was like, oh no, what do? I have so much. I'm going to build barns. So he could have had anxiety. He could have been, that's what kept him up at night. I don't know. And so he was hurting. But the other part was that the people who lacked goods, and some being tangible here, they were also hurting. And we have a lot of analogies. Whoops, that's my timer for me. We have a lot of ways we relate to injustice. The sense of lack, and how we're about trying to create positive relationship. And so basically, people with too much are out of relationship, and people with not enough also are missing out on relationship. And so, given that, I think about the reciprocity between us. And that's something I keep learning. I want to tell a little story about something I got to see. Probably, oh my goodness. So I'm 65, so probably about 50 years ago when I was a teenager. I have tons of these stories, and I hope that you'll find some of your stories in this, or this sparks some of your reflecting. So I was on one side of the street, and it was a bit wide street, but I was waiting for a bus. Back then, buses didn't have ways to let people who were in wheelchairs on. So I'm across the street, and there's a person in a wheelchair waiting for a bus. Okay. And then a few people came along, and they also were waiting for the bus. They helped carry the person in the wheelchair onto the bus. They never knew what an impact they made on my life by me being able to witness that. Another one, and then I'm going to stop, but another one is of when, now I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm in New York City, and I generally was okay with unhoused people, but for whatever reason that day, I saw an unhoused man who was behaving perfectly fine. But for whatever reason, I did this go around him, far away. And as I was doing that, I saw what I made up, or the story I told myself, was his daughter. And I was horrified at me helping this father be unseen. I lived and worked with that for weeks. I had to wrestle with my lack of vision. So I think it's really interesting to think about what we perceive as actual data our apprehension, our comprehension, how we understand that, and how that gives us perspective, so that hopefully we see with God's gaze.
That was surely the good news of God. Thank you so much, Rhoda.